Cultural turn was a term that was coined in the late 1980s, which describes the move in translation studies away from a linguistic study of texts and towards a consideration of the a cultural perspective and texts as cultural artifacts, if you like. Since then, the word turn has been used again and again for different developments in translation studies. So there could be an ideological turn, there could be a corpus-based turn, etc. But the cultural turn is the one that's most noted.
Okay, and these the cultural and ideological turn, they are linked somewhat to earlier chapters. Though some of the earlier theories did hint at sort of looking at translation in a broader, more cultural perspective.
Yeah, certainly. Chapter 7, the systems theories, looked at the cultural role of translation in a literary system. The Skopos theory of chapter 5, Hans Vermeer's work, was a big advance in considering the role of the target text in its target culture context. So the cultural turn took this further, I think, by adopting some forms of study related to cultural studies. So we've got gender, post-colonial studies, which influenced the forms of analysis and the theoretical frameworks which were employed.
And readers might have been aware of those sorts of schools of thought from their other studies, because obviously gender studies and post-colonial studies is quite common throughout the social sciences.
Yes, indeed. There was a move into translation studies at that point, just as earlier comparative literature had a close relationship with the study of translation from the 1960s onwards. But you've put your finger on an important point as to how independent translation studies actually is. And in many ways, translation studies is what's termed an interdiscipline. It works between, say, languages and some of the more cultural studies and social sciences, obviously with translation as a focal point, but it gives a new angle, I think, to some of these. Chapter 8 covers a huge amount of material, so I'm reluctant to... I'd like readers to realise that these are illustrative studies that could very well, I could very well have chosen other studies to highlight some of the main points. But I've looked at some studies of from a gender perspective, some from post-colonial perspective. Yeah. André Lefebvre is a key figure in the early parts of the chapter, and his concept of translation is rewriting. And that is important because there are many forms of rewriting. Just as translation rewrites a source text, so does creation of an anthology or criticism of a text. It is filtering, or in Lefebvre's term, refracting the text through another's eyes and through another's words and through another's perspective. Translation is perhaps transforms the text more than others, but is part of a whole way of rewriting texts.
So even just creating an anthology of someone's work is a rewriting in itself.
Indeed, because you're going to have to decide what are you going to anthologize. Which, if you're doing an anthology of poems of a poet, which ones are you going to choose? That will be affected by the poetics of the time, or even the ideology of the time and of the individual or institution that's putting that collection together. There'll probably be a preface which would guide the reader as well. So all of these is a rewriting.